was promoted. Again, in 1945, was implicated by the testimony of Elizabeth Bentley. Again, the reports were ignored, and he was promoted. Was identified a third time in 1946 by a Soviet defector in Canada, and again he was retained and promoted. Finally, after being identified a fourth time by former communist Hedda Massing, was convicted in 1950 for perjury in connection with his denials of espionage activities. Was released from prison in 1954 and began a public campaign to vindicate himself as the victim of a frame-up. In the years following the conviction of Alger Hiss, Nathaniel Weil became yet one more former member of the Soviet underground who testified that to his personal knowledge, Hiss was guilty as charged.
The answer to that is that I attended with Hiss probably, at a guess, 30 meetings of the cell. The cell never contained more than 8 or 10 members while I was in it. And I would also meet them at parties. So that I knew Hiss, even though I did not like him too well. I don't mean I disliked him. I mean he impressed me as a cold, calculating person who had a certain fanaticism about him, a lack of the human qualities that one likes. But I knew him well, so there was no problem in my mind as to identification.
I was not guilty of any of the things Mr. Chambers charged, except that I knew him briefly.
Were you ever a communist?
No, didn't happen to be.
It is estimated that for every person exposed by the testimony of former communists, there are many more that have remained undetected. Elizabeth Bentley stated in 1952 that while she was in the underground, she was told there were at least 2 additional espionage groups working in Washington under Soviet direction. Groups that were so important that not even she was allowed to learn of their identities. Neither of these cells have ever been exposed. In September of 1949, the Soviet Union successfully detonated its first atomic bomb. Western scientists were stunned because of earlier predictions that Soviet nuclear technology was at least a decade behind the United States. The story of how the Soviets so quickly acquired this technology begins with the American Lend-Lease program during World War II. Great Falls, Montana was the location of the U.S. Air Force Base that was used for Lend-Lease air shipments to Russia. Major George Racy Jordan was the officer in charge of this operation from 1942 to 1944. In his book, From Major Jordan's Diaries, he revealed that in addition to the expected crates of food and machinery, the Soviets also were being sent large numbers of black suitcases, which he was told were diplomatic luggage. Becoming suspicious, on one occasion he conducted a surprise inspection of these suitcases and found every one of them to be filled with such documents as maps of military installations and harbors, blueprints for weapons under development, photocopies of tens of thousands of inventions taken directly from the U.S. Patent Office, and countless file folders bulging with official documents of the federal government. Written across the front of one folder were the words, "From Hiss." It contained hundreds of military reports. One suitcase contained scientific and engineering documents, highlighted with such strange-sounding words as fission, cyclotron, proton, neutron, heavy water, uranium. Included also was a map labeled Oak Ridge, Manhattan Engineering District. And attached to these materials was a handwritten note on official White House stationery addressed to Anastas Mikoyan, the number 3 man in the Soviet Union. The note was signed by Harry Hopkins, the American official in charge of the Lend-Lease program, President Roosevelt's personal advisor and friend. In 1943, Hopkins at the White House spoke with Major Jordan by telephone, told him to expedite a special shipment that was coming through and not to make any official record of it. When the mysterious cargo arrived, it was identified as uranium salts. The shipment was sent through, and as requested, no official record was made, except in Major Jordan's diaries. In September of 1945, a Russian code clerk named Igor Guzenko, assigned to the Soviet embassy in Ottawa, approached Canadian officials and asked for political asylum.